Hello, I'm Krista McAllister, and welcome to Cerius Leadership. Whether you are growing your business or another area of your life into what you want it to be, I welcome you. And today I get to welcome Greg Newman. Oh, Greg, you've worked with dozens of startups. For over 25 years, you've been helping technology companies launch, grow, and succeed. And I am very curious to get into some of how you do that and what you see coming, having done this for 25 years in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. And yeah, it's been 25 years. It's funny how quickly time goes, but I've enjoyed it very much because I think that marketing is a central function. I think that marketing powers companies when done right. And as you and I have talked about before, I feel strongly about these things. So chances are we're going to get into some areas that I'm pretty passionate about.
I love it. Well, speaking of things that you're passionate about, one of the things I love about our conversations is they are not the run of the mill. They are, we see things very differently and sometimes not always the same, and it ends up being an engaging discussion. There's so much changing out there in the business world. It feels like we've got a change of generation, we've got a change of eras. What used to be change management is now just a way of doing business. We're constantly needing to use a different lens to look at things. And you've got a perspective I would love to get started with, and that's the lead funnel. Traditional marketing lead funnel concept is really outdated.
Yeah, it's funny you say it. It is just to call it outdated. I'm not sure it was ever a good idea. It was. We'll jump right in and say that. And the reason for it is very simple. I like to think in terms of an infinite loop. And the reason I like to think about an infinite loop is that it's about a customer relationship, right? And the idea that marketers should only be focused on the front end of that relationship, I think, is a real problem. And I understand why that happens, but I think it's important to take a step back. And so when you look at things through the lens of an infinite loop, you see that some effort needs to be put into a bunch of activities that frequently fall outside the purview of traditional marketing departments. And that's too bad. That really does not serve the company well. You want to look at things, I believe, from the customer backward, right? Ask yourself, who are we serving? And what are their needs throughout the life cycle? And when you do that, you see, of course, that in a loop, you've got promotion, obviously. And here we are trying to attract new customers, and we get a new customer. Typically, especially with the technology companies that I work with, you need to get that customer on board and trained up. These are all points at which the relationship can falter. And if we're not cognizant of that, and if we're not mindful of what it means to give the customer a great experience throughout the entire relationship, then we're really mishandling that relationship. And this we all know. We know that our best marketers are our customers. If we do this right, we have customers out there marketing for us. Why wouldn't we want that, right? And so I think it's very important to consider that infinite loop as a model. And the other thing that it does, not only in terms of treating the customers right, it helps to align the company. The company is, it's certainly in my world, in startup land, where my clients tend to be, starting up to maybe 50 million a year in sales. So not huge companies, although I think this certainly applies to all companies. The misalignment that happens tends to be around a break between the founder and the keeper of the vision. And that can certainly take different forms at different companies. It doesn't have to be a founder, but it can often be sales, for instance, a sales-led company. I see these frequently. I encounter them. Marketing is taken out of the equation in those early conversations, in those early stages, rather than making marketing an integral part of the process. And I know I'm going to say right at the outset here, you're going to hear me say a lot about how marketing needs to do more, marketing needs to be at the center. It does. And not because I'm an egomaniac and I think that I have all the answers. That's not true. What it is, and all the best marketers, certainly the people that I respect most, they check their ego at the door. What it has to do with is coordination and collaboration. And it has to do with the fact that marketers are perfectly positioned to be a hub, to be right there in the middle of the company, getting inputs and outputs. They have the right vantage. They have the right point of view. They can be the keeper of the customer and the vision and the values of the company. And at the same time, can help to describe product or service, help to describe the go-to-market strategy, thanks to the research. When you look at it that way, it's hard to imagine why marketing would not be at the center of all of this. But it seems like it's foreign to some or many technology startups, certainly, and many companies. And you know what? I got to be honest. I think marketers have done it. We've kind of shot ourselves in the foot. I got to say, we need to take some responsibility for this. We spent so much time focusing on creative back in the David Ogilvy days of the best creative wins. Those are long gone. I joined the workforce at about the time that was finishing, and I saw the rise of technology. I rode the wave. I rode when desktop publishing came on board. I wrote a thesis for myself, and I said, this is going to change everything. This is going to change marketing. The big agencies are under attack. And I was working at the big agencies at the time. And I was hollering and nobody was listening. And I said, you don't seem to understand. You can't keep doing business the same old way. And it was exciting to see that happen, because I felt that the democratization of technology was going to lead to more widespread adoption of marketing. And that wasn't, in fact, what happened. Instead, what happened is the technologists took over. And that's because I think marketers have done a poor job of putting forth a model and a process that is easy to understand and is measurable. We're all accountable. Every one of us in a company has to be accountable. And if the CTO can stand up and say, give me $1 million in 3 months and a team of 20, and I'll build you that product, and you can hold me accountable to that, then the CMO had better be able to stand up and say something similar about how he or she is going to run the department and the function. And so often it's the case that that's not happening. And it's not happening, in my view, because the focus too often has been on marketing is all about promotion. No, marketing is about, we know the 4 P's, sorry, product, again, price, place, and promotion. And this infinite loop is a way to abstract from that and to say, look, think about the lifespan, the life cycle of a customer, and imagine all the things you need to do to support that.
Let's step in. I want to pause here and take a look at that infinite loop, and let's unpack that a little bit here. Starting with the funnel really made for new customers. They come in at the top, they become, the relationship starts at the top, they come in at the bottom. At the same time, for years, and the data is out there that supports it, to say, nurture your new customers, especially in technology. You've got the new head of customer success to support that infinite loop. And in there, basic one, how do you balance the need for new customers, we'll say, to come enter that loop somehow, we'll say the top of the funnel, but then keep them in our ecosystem. We want to create that ecosystem because it costs us significantly less to keep a new customer than to go find, or to keep an old customer than to go find a new customer. So let's unpack that a little bit. When you look at this ecosystem that we want to create, where marketing's got to be able to manage both of those, or be held accountable for both of those.
Yes. There's a couple of really good concepts in there in what you just said. And I want to start with an acknowledgement. This is not really a secret, but I don't talk about it much. The funnel isn't totally gone, right? The funnel has a role to play, but it's diminished. The funnel is definitely still a concept we can use at the top and the beginning of these relationships. And you alluded to it, you said it yourself. So I want to be clear about that. The other thing, and you're so right, is that it's so much more effective and cost effective and better for us to simply hang on to the customers we have. And I think we forget sometimes, once we have a customer, the way in which we got them typically is that and I'm a challenger sale guy, this is what I love, we disrupted their thinking. At one point, we got them to stop, and we got them to think differently about something and about our stuff and about our solution. And it resonated with them, and they believed in our vision and our values, even as much as they believed in the technology or in the product itself. I think that when we look at nurturing relationships with existing customers, we have to look for the opportunities to continue to educate them, to continue to connect with them, and to give them reasons to engage with us. And I find that obviously we can't have a customer advisory board of every customer, right? Customer advisory boards are great, but imagine with thanks to digital technology, why can't we? Why can't we be more interactive, asking more questions of our customers? I find that some companies are really reluctant to do this, and I don't know why. It is so much fun. And maybe they're scared. Maybe they're scared they're going to get answers they don't like. But to me, that's power. If you give somebody an opportunity to say, gee, I really like this and don't like that, you've given them an opening to have a tighter relationship with you. You may or may not be able to address their actual concerns. Usually, yeah, probably somehow. But that doesn't matter. The point is you've given them a voice. And to me, that's what this loop is all about. It's about saying you're here and you're valued.
And what I find rather than I don't want to know what my customer has to say, I want to know, the hard part is I don't have it built into my process.
Yeah.
Who's the one asking? How are we asking? When are we asking? We talked to interim executives saying, before you even start an assignment, know up front and set the expectation. I'm going to ask for feedback. I'm going to ask for testimonial. What am I going to ask for? How am I collecting it? What am I going to do with it? What's that process? And you had mentioned it kind of the beginning is really that role of marketing can play such a pivotal role in it to set up that process, that data collection.
Yeah.
That reminder to the team of we've hit this milestone. Let's ask this information and get this feedback. That's not, as a salesperson, that's not my first thing. My first thing is to go after the next sale. As an operator, my first thing and everything inside me says, get the service or product out the door.
Yeah.
So now we're starting to kind of define what makes a really good market leader who can set up that system. What points of data are we gathering at which point?
Yeah. Yeah. These are great questions. So a couple issues to unpack there that I think are important. One, the alignment between sales and marketing is critical. Of all the different departments in the company that marketing needs to be close with, certainly sales tops the list. And it's important to recognize, and this is what I say to my teams all the time, if as a marketer you don't love selling and you don't enjoy the process of selling, I'm not sure I want you on my team, because that's what we're here to do. We're not here to be creative in a vacuum. We're not here to simply do research and to think that we're going to somehow solve all the problems of the company with a marketing plan. We're here to go to market. And we need to do that with the team, the sales team especially. I advocate for the marketing department to own the inside sales reps for this reason. The marketing leadership, running and managing the inside sales reps, and it doesn't have to be this way, but at companies that I run, I tend to like this, is it gives us a chance to do exactly what you're saying, which is let's make sure that we're always in the information gathering business. And there's a reason for it. It's a very self-serving reason. Number one, of course, we want the data, but sales are facilitated, again, by giving the customer a voice. We all know the old joke, right? In sales, right? You set up the challenging question. The next person to speak loses. Be quiet. Let the customer talk and find out what their needs are. Find out what's going on in their heads. Frequently, what the customer initially stated their problem is not in fact what it is. So information gathering has to be woven in. And there's a bit of training involved in this, for sure, right? That salespeople who have never done this before might find a bit foreign. But I love working closely with salespeople. It's very give and take. It's very much about I'm teaching and I'm learning at the same time, always. And I would encourage all marketing leaders to do the same thing. The data that needs to be gathered, to me, I think I'm going to answer your question directly now, is at the outset of a prospect relationship and then a customer relationship, has to be around what led them to this. Where did you find us, right? Let's start with that. We'd like to know why. I love why. Why is the best question in the world, right? Why did you seek this out? What and how have you been solving the problem to date, right? There's a lot of really great open-ended questions like that. Those open-ended questions might seem a little scary to some salespeople because they want to get to the next step, which is talking about the product. No, you don't. You actually don't. You think you do, but you don't. What you want to do is get them talking. If you end up giving them a little bit about the product and tying it back to the things they mentioned, you might actually get the sale. It's amazing. You don't really have to do as much talking as you think. And that's because, they feel the customer, the prospect feels listened to. Obviously that's a lot of qualitative data when you're having a customer conversation. We can certainly look at, when I look at a measurable marketing scheme and a measurable marketing environment, I want to look at quantitative data as well. And we can have a whole conversation around that. I think that there's mechanisms and technology that need to be put in place. There's a whole technology stack. There's too much technology, frankly, in marketing at this point. But
I,
anyway.
right now we're working on consolidating it because it was so available from, you could just go get an app and add to it. We're in the process of consolidating it. Wait, those questions that you're asking, that information, I've heard different perspectives on, from it's marketing's role to come up with the positioning, the talking points. It's up to the salespeople to get the audience and then to deliver them. When you look at some of those questions and that data gathering, let's take away the roles of that's marketing's role or that's sales role.
Sure.
Who in the organization would you pin to say, God, you're curious? You love asking questions and you can gain trust quickly and get people to open up to you. Would you assign that to one person to go gather that information, or would you make it as part of the process, part of the sales process?
Yeah, great question. I find that the person best positioned inside of companies to do this from temperamentally and skills wise is the product marketing manager. The product marketing manager, that function is huge and often gets overlooked. Again, in my experience, it gets overlooked frequently because the founder plays the role of product marketing manager. Perfectly acceptable in a startup. But this is an important role because I find that they can bring to bear the skills needed to go ask the questions you're talking about in the manner that's needed in order to get to aggregate data, right? Salespeople are great at many things, and I have a huge amount of respect for selling. It's hard. But we have to remember that they are constrained in some important ways, including the fact that they tend to have conversations one-on-one and one-off at a time. And I find that sometimes leads to them exaggerating the importance of the last call they had. And I think it's important as marketers because we exist a step behind them to be able to understand that concept, take the information, filter it, process it, and aggregate it. And I think product marketing managers, the best ones, bring tremendous curiosity. They bring a rigor to bridging the gap between the market and the product development group, the technology group, so that something can be brought to life that's actually useful, that's solving a problem. And it's a special set of skills that can do that.
Some of the best technology companies I've seen, or product companies, through that process, almost pre-sell or get a commitment on that sell for, if I build it, you will buy it, and the customer is in on that build process.
Yes. I have a story. I haven't shared these stories today yet. This is a good one. There's a fellow named Finus Connor. He is famous for being one of the founders of Seagate and then Connor Peripherals. I got to know him a dozen years ago or so. We were both invested in a company and we had some mutual acquaintances. And he asked me to join him in a startup. And I jumped at the chance because this is Finus. Who else has had two startups go to Fortune 500? I mean, what a rare opportunity. And the reason it's relevant to your question is he absolutely personified what you're talking about. He was so much about sell, design, build. He would go out there and absolutely sell the dream. And it was so much fun to work with him for that reason. And we built a product that's still out there doing some really neat stuff for multi-factor authentication, security using a physical device. He's a hardware guy, right? So he had a hardware idea. And we got to meet with, thanks to his connections, we got to meet with senior executives at Samsung and HID Global and all these great spots and sell them on the dream and on the vision. And one thing that I took away from that experience and watching him do this so well was that he didn't just sell the dream as he understood it. He was actually iterating as he's talking. He's listening. And people who haven't had a chance to work with somebody of that caliber need to understand that lesson, that it's really nimble and incredibly, it's a gift. It's brilliant and it's wonderful to watch.
It reminds me, early in my career, I worked with a CEO who's very similar and would come back from customer meetings and say, here's what I sold. And we would look at each other and go, we don't make that, or we don't do that currently. So, well, yes, we do, because I just sold it.
Yeah.
That's a big transition. And I think that's some of the challenges that owners or CEOs who have been in the industry for a while, you talk about the product manager,
Yeah.
How do you go about transitioning that? Because that really is the core
Mhm.
of keeping the customer in mind, customer-centric marketing and selling, keeping
Mhm.
our organizations around that. Because at some point, that CEO really needs to be the visionary. They need to be managing. They've got to peel off parts of what they did at the beginning.
Yeah.
How do you go about transitioning that to someone else who has that a similar love for gaining insights and listening to the customer?
Yeah, in the startup environment, that transition can be rough. I've experienced it now at multiple companies many times. Uh, the way I've learned to solve that is by stratifying and saying, okay, we know that the vision, the overarching vision is yours, CEO, and it should remain yours. As we begin to identify lines of business, those need to transition away and they need to be given to a professional manager so that you can move on, CEO, to continue to innovate and continue to be the visionary that you are. If that conversation goes well, it's easy. If that conversation doesn't go well, that can be a problem. But I find it's a very natural split, and it usually frankly does go well because the fact is that CEOs innately recognize, oh my gosh, there are so many details. Do I really want to follow up on this and do this? And furthermore, and this is hugely important to the success of any company, especially at the outset or in getting into a new line of business. You're going to have a beachhead strategy. You're going to have something that's not necessarily the end all be all. It's let's get our feet dry here, and then we'll figure out where we go from there. I find that by doing that, by lowering expectations a little bit, creating a product that might be just that beachhead, that immediately allows the CEO to feel less emotionally invested, less of an owner of that. And they've done their job. They've been successful and they can feel comfortable about transitioning out. So that's important. It does, because of who I work with, the kind of company I work with, this comes up a lot. And I find myself navigating those conversations. And I think yet, if you look at the next step from that, and this is important, and I'll just mention it because it's a dysfunction that I hate to see, the CEO will frequently transfer that power to the technology team. I've outlined my vision, go build it. That vision is never complete. It just isn't. It's not the fault of the CEO. It's just not complete. And so it puts a real burden on the technology team, and it's unfair to them. It really is. And I've had to come in and clean things like that up. I had that a few years ago at a software company that was already very successful, but it was sort of successful in spite of itself. It knew it had to change, but it didn't know what was preventing it from changing. And it was simply this organizational dysfunction. And once we addressed it, everything was fine. And everybody was on board with the new vision. It was just one of those things that nobody had seen. They didn't understand that.
And we see that whether it's coming initially from the CEO or coming from somewhere else, anytime you're transitioning information from one group or one team to the next, one of the conversations we've had a lot the last couple of years is how do we go from the product development, how we're going to position and market it, to then how it's being sold, what's being sold, and then how do we deliver on that?
Yeah.
And we've seen the marketing and sales roles are separate. No, we're going to combine them. Now we're going to combine in the operations role. And we've got that chief revenue officer, or in some cases, even marketing and sales are becoming the responsibility of the COO. Kind
Yeah.
of to your point, in order to keep them really succinctly working together within the ecosystem. In marketing, we've seen move from, as you had mentioned, we're not managing the creatives, we're not managing the vendors, we're managing the customer
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
that customer
it's tough.
relationship.
Marketing departments, functions span such a wide gamut. You end up having the worst of all possible worlds in some cases, in that you ask a marketing department to do a tremendous number of things, which involve vastly different types of skills, and yet you don't staff properly frequently. And I say I mean, I realize not every company does this, but I see it unfortunately too often. I mentioned product marketing as the hub. Marketing operations needs to be there for the technology stack I mentioned, and the reporting and all of that. Those functions are pretty specific in themselves, and then you shift to the more creative stuff like content and communication and branding and design and running those campaigns. Not to mention, field marketing and demand gen. If depending on the product you have, right, you may be out there doing that too. And I have yet to find somebody who can do all of those well. So you need to have different people frequently, and it's important at the outset and the budgeting process to talk about that, be very explicit about that, and make sure you're staffing properly.
All right. We're going to break that down a little bit, because even though I'm familiar with a lot of that, I wouldn't be able to take notes fast enough, and I know shorthand. So you've got starting with X. What are the different components of marketing, or how did you just segment them? And this is probably whether we're talking about a technology company, a service company, manufacturing company. How are you differentiating those? And whether they're part of an overarching marketing department or possibly even embedded, we're seeing a lot of cross-functionality.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And cross-functionality is fine in my book. It's important simply to identify that these functions need to get done, and what is the standard that we're going to be measured by? Are we meeting that standard? And so, especially in startup world, I have no problem with sharing resources and doing cross-functional work. But it all starts with product marketing. This is the idea that somebody has to own the product, and I love the term product owner, by the way, inside of a company. I just think nomenclature matters, and I think that name really says something. And so this is a person who's a business manager, right? This is a person who, in many cases would be, whether they have an MBA or not, this is that kind of person. They can do the market forces assessment analysis, right? They can look at the landscape, they understand customers and competitors and substitutes and all that. And what they're going to be doing then is driving in a couple of directions. They've got, I love graphing all this out. We don't need to look at charts and graphs and circles and arrows today, but in my mind, there's a graph that goes in two directions, right? One is it goes over to the product team and the technology team to build things. And then the other side, it goes over to the marketing communications team. And it goes over in that direction. I suppose really when you think about it, you probably, if you're going to draw with arrows, you're going to have an arrow going around actually, because things are going to come back. It should be a two-way street, in other words. But nevertheless, it all starts with product marketing sitting at the hub of this and gathering data, sharing that data, and then collaborating with the team to come up with the product or service. Marketing operations is the next thing I mentioned, and it should be there, and it's fundamental because it's about how are we building ourselves? How are we going to market? How are we going to report? What are we doing in terms of our funnel we talked about, right? Let's map all that out. Let's map out our KPIs. Let's map out, how it is we're going to measure ourselves and what tools we're going to use for that, and what tools we're going to use to go to market. And that leads to the content and communication team. This is public relations. It's editorial stuff. It's obviously it has to do with creating content. Content is huge. I don't know when it was ever not huge, but I know it's talked a lot about these days. Again, if you're going to be disruptive as a marketer, if you're going to be teaching people and hoping to sell in a challenger model, you have to be saying something that's different and unique. And by the way, have a point of view. It's fine. Content, communication, and creative can sometimes be mushed together. I mentioned creative separately, but that's because often what I find and important about creative is I'm a huge fan of finding agencies, outside firms, that can come in with a fresh perspective and take everything we've done and give it that next level treatment. And yet it's important, if that's the case, if you're going to have an outside agency doing that, understand that they're only as good as you manage them. They can only be as good as the brief. If you're not giving them the right information, they're never going to get there. And so, that you can outsource brand and design, your logo and your website development, all that can be outsourced, and fine. You probably, frankly, should, if you're looking to build something for the first time, especially, and really want high quality work. Field marketing and demand gen was the last thing I mentioned. And this is very closely tied to sales. Depending on the maturity of your organization, it can be, in my world, it has to do with frequently working with technology integrators and partners, helping them to put on events, helping them and it could be their event, could be our event, could be an industry event, helping to put together other demand gen activities. And so that function is really shared. That's definitely one it crosses right over into sales. And yet the direction they receive needs to come from marketing. It's got to be strategic. It can't be just go out there and talk to them. No, we're out there for a purpose. I'm not sending you on a plane somewhere or boondoggle. You're going to be there for a purpose, and let's outline what that purpose is, and let's measure.
A lot of the times we'll see marketing job descriptions are being brought in as an interim CMO, and we look at outcome-based roles and responsibility. What do we want to accomplish? But when you're hiring internally in that job description or roles, the marketing role usually says responsible for, and it lists off a series of tasks.
Yes.
Which is what you've just divided it into is the product owner, the marketing operations, the communications, the field, and I'm sure there's how do we get that feedback into the organ, all of the others through the ecosystem. Those are probably owned by different individuals when we don't have the budget to have those for, or that could be the roles and responsibilities of someone. And if they don't have the expertise, they're outsourcing. They're getting some experts. They're outsourcing. They're bringing consultants. They're finding contract individuals. Because I hear a lot. I'm frustrated. My marketing person isn't doing what I want. They're probably frustrated because the market is great in one of these four, but not all four. How do you manage through that?
It's really tough. You put your finger on one of my biggest challenges, and I'm sure other marketers feel the same way. Because you're right, you have to hire for function. You're not hiring for outcome, except at the senior level, right? And so I'm being brought in and I'm accountable for an outcome. And then it's my job to go manage a team. I had this happen a couple of years ago at a company. I was brought in as a fractional CMO. And I identified very quickly, I sat down with the team, and I was told candidly by the CEO, we've got some real problems. I don't know what they are, but I know we have problems. And I said, well, let's see if we can get to the bottom of it. And I met with the team. And I identified a very high functioning individual who was absolutely in the wrong place. There was just no question that this guy could flourish somewhere else, but he was not right here. And it's brutal, but it had to be done. And as we moved him out, and we did it very, he was a great guy. We did it pleasantly, and we did it the best way you can. He departed, and we did bring in outside. Immediately we saw an improvement in the function because we didn't have somebody who was not right for the role, misunderstanding what we were trying to achieve, and was very overt about it. He was a great guy, and we would talk. He just didn't agree. And I'm sorry, but this is not a democracy. You don't get to disagree with me. I mean, I'm listening to you, and then at some point I go, no, because it's my responsibility as a leader, and I could be wrong. But that's okay. That's why I'm in that role. And that's what leaders need to understand and I think take responsibility for. And it's the leader's job to bridge that gap and to evaluate people based on past work. That's why all marketers typically have a portfolio, right? Past work, show me what we've done before. And I ask two questions of prospective employees. What did you achieve and how did you achieve it? And if they achieve something great, I'm interested. If they can't tell me how they achieved it, you're done. You're done. I mean, our conversation is very short.
And some of those achievements and accomplishments are aligned with what we need accomplished or what we need achieved in this situation, which is, I'm curious as to the profile. You said you found other individual things. It was a world of difference. How did you key in on what you needed accomplished in that role?
Yeah, it's good to look at this and unpack it just for a minute, because in that role and at that company, which is a software company and a SaaS company, the marketing department was overlooked, and this fellow was for the right reasons, good reasons, was attempting to step up and do more and be a hero, be a little bit of a hero. And I cautioned everybody, don't be so quick to be a hero. It's not, if you see a problem, raise the issue, but you don't need to jump in and necessarily solve it. And he was doing some of that. And he was attempting to, Band-Aid, I guess you'd call it, certain things that weren't working well. He really was not in a role and at a level where he could address these issues adequately. He was attempting, in other words, to patch, right, and to make up for inadequacies in other ways. So I can't fault him for that. And that's why I wanted to make sure we treated him with respect, and he he left. But the idea that I like to do is, and this is just my brain, but I think it's pretty normal, is to say, hang on a second, let's take a step back, let's abstract from what we're doing here, and let's ask ourselves, first of all, who are we serving? The questions, right? Who do we serve? What are we the best in the world at? What can we do, and what do we need to be doing in order to go to market with our strategy? And now, do we have the resources to achieve that? And the answer in that case with that company was that we were probably about 80% right. And I told the team at the very first meeting a joke that I'm sure all of us recognize, and it's not that funny. When you launch a rocket to the moon and you are 1 degree off, you will be over 4,000 miles away from the moon when you get there. You will not be landing on the moon, in other words, right? So 1 degree matters. And if we're 20% off, that's huge. Sorry to mix the metaphors and the percentages and the degrees, but you get
I've got the picture in my head, and I appreciate it, because then that goes into, well, we were close.
Yeah.
Is close going to get us to our destination?
Yeah.
In bringing that back full circles, you talked about at the beginning of customer centric. They're the guiding line of what we're going through in the customer journey. Who in this process, whether hybrid organization, whether marketing's at the hub or we've got everyone in their functional roles, who owns the customer journey? Because that's something that we don't, as you've talked through all this, that's what's been ringing through in my head is you're mapping out the customer journey and gathering data from each step of that journey.
Yeah, you are. The content and communications team, I believe, has to map out the customer journey and own that journey. They need to communicate that and share that with the rest of the company, obviously, and develop content to meet that journey, right? To fulfill. So the content and communications team, I think, should own that in conjunction with the rest of the marketing function, and again, sharing with the rest of the company. And by the way, real quick, the more you can share as marketers with your company internally, the better you're gonna be, right? It's amazing how little people actually know about what marketing does, or there's not only no understanding in some cases, or less understanding than needed, but there's misunderstanding as well. Oh, I thought you guys were doing X. Oh, I thought we were going here. So I really recommend to all marketers, don't forget your internal audience, kind of key. And to make sure you're talking to them. And it can be as simple as a newsletter, but I recommend maybe even some meetings and some fun. Have marketing put on a lunch, and talk to everybody. So content communication needs to own the buyer's journey. And I want to take a moment to address, I think, the first part of your question, your comment. A lot of this gets a lot easier if you get the first stuff right. If you really know who your customer is and you really understand what you're the best in the world at, then, and you come up with a pretty good strategy, right? Because you know your competitors and you understand the substitutes and you understand the market landscape. Then the rest of it, which is the creative and the content and the measurement of the campaigns, that's all actually not that hard to tweak and fix, because chances are you're not going to get it all right the first time. We know that. And so my joke about the rocket isn't actually valid, because rockets have little stabilizers on them and they can adjust course, right? And you'll get to the moon if you're generally pointed in the right direction. So I think it's important for marketers to recognize that getting the big stuff right and understanding the problem you solve and why you're the best in the world at it, and who your customer is and what they're really looking for, means that you can try out different strategies, different creative, different messages, and obviously measure everything, test everything, and continue to improve. I had a good friend. I'll tell you a quick story. We were just talking the other day. So it's not my story, it's his story, but he was working with a company that is in the movie distribution business, and they're pretty buttoned up, pretty smart. Not one of the major studios, but a studio that knows what they're doing, and they were just a little off, and they felt it, but they didn't know why. And they brought him in, and he said, you're doing great on the big pillars, but we know a few things about digital marketing, and we see that your creative needs to be tweaked. And it was an easy fix, and it saved them millions in wasted ad spend. He called it his favorite kind of assignment, because it was, he just touched one thing and it changed, so many different things.
I was going to say, right now you're setting an unrealistic expectation.
I know.
Anyone who wants to bring in because you don't know whether it's just one of those little tweaks when you set the easy stuff, or if we're not asking the right questions or know the answers to who is our customer, what problem are we solving, and what outcome are they expecting from us?
Exactly. And he did walk that company through those questions. He's a pro, and they answered them in a way that made him feel comfortable. And so it's a fun story, but is it likely? I don't know that I'll ever see that in my career. I have never walked in.
That's definitely a win for the books. You had just mentioned and are we measuring and tracking the same things? You hit on
Yeah.
my favorite topic.
Yeah.
I think everything is measurable. I know you've got have a tagline of, and you speak to measurable marketing.
Yeah.
When you look at KPIs, ROI, everything that any business owner, business leader wants to say, show me the numbers.
Yeah.
There's a list of 20, 30 marketing numbers.
Yeah.
I always say what gets measured gets managed, what gets managed improves. But
Yeah.
are we measuring and managing, improving the thing that's going to get us to the outcome we want?
Yes.
How are we tying that together, making sure we're measuring those metrics, those KPIs that are going to get us to the outcome?
Yeah, it's a great question to ask because I find that the term outcome gets misdefined frequently. For marketers, the outcome is, well, I got you an MQL. No, that's not an outcome. That's a step. The outcome is a sale and a customer relationship, right? So I like to work from the customer backward. I like to work from the sale backward. And I like to ask if I could, make a sale with one phone call and then be done, I would take that. That's not going to happen. And it's a fun thought experiment. So what else do we need to do? Let's build up from there and ask ourselves, okay, in addition to one phone call, what else might we need to do for a sale? And let's go ahead and put those activities in place and let's go measure those things. But always being measured, I believe, through the full funnel, right? Through the entire process, because the idea, and this continues after with the infinite loop, right? You want to measure attrition. SaaS companies know all about this, right? The idea of
Yes.
churn is huge. So you definitely want to be measuring that. And that's part of the reason why you want to be keeping up with customers who wouldn't want to, lower that figure. And so frequently when I look at younger companies, startup companies that are, maybe having some success and they've got some sales under their belts. A good example comes to mind a few years ago, a company in the cloud data storage space. I worked for them, ran worldwide marketing for them, and I came in and said politely, "You're doing this all wrong, and here's why." And it didn't go over well because they were tied to a very sales-oriented culture and a very sales-oriented model. And they were, in fact, making sales, and they were, in fact, nurturing their customer relationships very well, to their credit. But the cost of sales was so high, it was unsustainable. And we had raised a $25 million Series B, and I was brought in as part of that, and I had a responsibility to reform these numbers. The funders were very clear about that, the venture capital group. So we took a look, we broke down the entire funnel, and we saw that the customers preferred by sales tended to come from shows, and the shows were very expensive propositions. And I put in place, they'd never done before, believe it or not, a very simple webinar routine, right? We said, well, we're gonna do virtual events. You like live events? Let's do virtual. Let's see how it goes. And it was not just one order of magnitude; it was 2 orders of magnitude cheaper to acquire a customer through webinars than it was. I'm talking a customer, not a lead, than it was through these live sales. That's compelling data. And if we were only to look at the leads and say, well, we get a lot of leads from the shows and we don't get nearly as many leads from the webinar, we might stop and say, well, we should do more shows, right? But measure the proper thing and you see suddenly that it was very inefficient.
And just in case, I want to make sure we've got clarity here. I'm going to guess you didn't just do one webinar, measure it, and say, "Yep, that was successful," or "Nope, we're never doing that again."
Right.
There's some consistency to that.
Yes, exactly. I set up a whole program. We did a webinar a month, and we did it for 6 months, and we watched how that developed in conjunction with other activities as well, and nurturing and outreach, and we put in place the kind of stuff we've been talking about, so that we could help customers. And we're in a digital first posture, right? The customers are in digital first posture. We know this, and so we made sure that we had content available for download. We had videos they could watch, and then some of this is gated, of course, and then so we could measure some of that too. And then we had the webinars, which are a great middle of funnel device, right? Sort of somebody's interested and maybe they want to learn more. And we had a series that involved customers that would come in and give testimonials. We had industry experts that we could tap because we're well connected. And then I brought in, for instance, one of my product marketing managers because I thought he had a great point of view and I wanted to interview him. And that turned out to be one of our best. People would go back and rewatch and download. We tracked all the stats on that. But we know that we've got to do these things if we're going to meet people where they're at, right? Sure, people are at a show. I get that, but it's not the environment in which we can count on getting the kind of quality of leads that we want. So this was a big change for that organization, huge impact in terms of the numbers. But funny enough, it was hard for them to swallow. They went against culture. And I got to say this, I didn't make this up. Between strategy and culture wins every time. And so it's important to recognize that. And the culture comes from the top. This is where it gets set usually. It doesn't get set anywhere else.
You did get enough runway to give it a try, walk it through, and maybe find a blend in the end. There's a lot of stories, a lot of information. We've covered a lot of ground here. I'm a business owner, a CEO. I'm probably a little either frustrated with where my marketing is, where my sales are. I want to get more traction. I know I want to change something. And I think you said it a couple times is I know something's not right. I just don't know what it is.
Right.
What would be your advice to a business leader who's trying to figure out where in that puzzle or how to enhance their marketing efforts inside, really leverage? Sometimes we're only using 10-20% of the resources that we have. We're not tapping into the full potential.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so true. This problem does occur quite a bit, and I'm glad you put your finger on it. I think when I walk into a company that's experiencing something like that, I bring with me a point of view that, and I'm a marketer, so I try to boil things down to clever quips, and that is, let's simplify, let's unify, and let's amplify. Let's do it in that order, right? And so simplify means let's get back to basics. Let's understand why we got into this business. What do we think we're selling? It could be the case, I don't, depending on the nature of the company, maybe you're selling products you don't need to be selling. Maybe you're selling them in a way that is not a good fit for the customer. Nevertheless, these are fundamental questions that need to get answered. So I would say there's a back to basics, and then unify means let's get everybody in the company seeing it the same way. And so it sounds a little bit like a restart, and maybe it is, but it doesn't have to be a tear it down, build it back up so much as a let's roll through this. I try very, very hard with existing companies to be as non-disruptive as possible, because I think there are ways to do this, over time. You don't have to stop everything you're doing. The joke about changing the tires while you're driving on the freeway, we all know, but it is possible you can do some of that, and I try very hard to do that. But it means, in most cases, it means just take a step back, take a breath, and simplify, because the chances are you've overstretched.
I love it. And that's an easy way to break it down. And you can run some test scenarios on where are we getting stuck?
Yeah.
Are we overcomplicating it? Do we not have everyone on the same page, or are we just not doing enough of it? And we need to lean into it more.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I always enjoy our conversations.
Thank you.
I love it. Sometimes there's alignment. Sometimes we share different perspectives. It always ends up being entertaining. I appreciate your expertise, your years of experience, and being able to simplify it for us today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for joining Cerius Leadership, I should say, because whatever is needed inside the organization, wherever the challenges are, we're serious about being able to bring some expertise, bring some thought leadership, and get the organization unstuck. Thank you so much, Greg.
Bye-bye.